Huge cedar tree right behind me. Our family's been camping underneath that cedar tree for about 20 years. And well, all the kids decided they're coming up with the grandkids. So how can Grandpa not show up for Shabbat in this holy place? In front of me, I wish I could show you the view. We've got Gush Halav to the north. We've got Tzfat Ir Kodesh to the east. We've got Tiveria off in the distance in the Kinneret. You can't ask for much more for a spiritual vacation. But the Lighthouse goes on and our work goes on. And we are broadcasting on a tethered hotspot. So I'm hoping it's going to hold on, but it seems to be holding up pretty good so far. There we are close to the parking lot, so you'll hear cars come by. I did another class and there were people dancing and singing all around. So here in Meron, anything goes. It'll be like this till 3 or 4 in the morning. People coming and going from all over Israel to this portal of holiness that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai's grave has created. The tzaddik is a conduit of God because he did the work to become that. And that really touches on tonight's subject, a Kabbalistic personality profile. What we're going to do tonight is first learn about some profiles of the great ones who came before us and how their tests created them. See, we don't like to be tested, but the truth is our tests are what make us into who we need to become for Hashem's sake. So, it's a paradigm shift in our attitude towards challenge. And, I'm here. It's easy for me to hear and talk about it. Used to be a challenge just to go on and write an email. But we're advancing slowly. No, but in all seriousness, our spiritual challenges are that which create the vessel which receives new light from God that transforms us. So we really, as Rav Yisrael Desser once said, Halavai, I had more suffering and more Yisurim. Excuse me, because he already understood this principle that our tests and challenges create the people that we can become. And without them, I think it would be just too easy just to kind of skate through life. So this is the first section of this tonight's seminar. We're going to talk about these tzaddikim and their tests and how they faced them and overcame them. And then we're going to talk a little more about the Kabbalah and the different traits. And then I've designed, in graduate school, they give you all kinds of tests, and they also teach you how to make tests. So I've kind of used some of those university skills to put together a series of questions that should help us focus in on our own personality profile through the lens of Kabbalah, not through the lens of these doctors or those doctors at the various psychiatric institutes around the world, but rather through the ancient wisdom of the Kabbalah. We're going to look at ourselves, and each person, of course, according to his own level. So let's begin with some introductory questions that we've already asked before in previous weeks, but it's good to repeat them. First of all, what is a chariot? Right, a chariot is a vehicle. You get on the chariot, you whip the horse, and away you go. But what is a spiritual chariot? Why is the Kabbalah focused on the chariot? And the Sechet Hagigah and the Talmud talks about the learning of the workings of the chariot, Maseh, Merkava. Well, essentially, it's the idea of the conduit from the infinite to the finite, and how there is a spiritual movement of the soul from above to below and from below to above. And we're moving back and forth. When we come down this world, we're taking the long ride into the physical realm. And then when we leave after 120, we take the elevator back up. But the metaphor holds because when you travel, generally you're doing so for the purpose of delivering something or receiving something. The Baal Shem Tov says, every interaction has a transfer of holy sparks. Every interaction that you go through every day of your life You're transferring something and you're receiving something. So that's part of the purpose of the chariot. Now, we, of course, in our modern imaginations relate to chariots as, the 300 warriors of Persia taking on the Macedonian Empire, et cetera, et cetera. That is true. And Pharaoh and his chariots, well, they couldn't swim too well. They ended up at the bottom of the Red Sea. Or is it the Yam Suf, I should say. But so these chariots, though, that's really not enough for us to understand how it's going to help me serve God, how it's going to help these ideas help me. What I have to understand is if there's a chariot, there's a road. You have to have a road to travel on. And the map of the road, it's a living map, by the way. It's not a piece of paper. It's a living map, is the tree of life. And that means it's your soul. In other words, the chariot of God is that vehicle which brings the spark of holiness into consciousness. And then when you pray and learn with all your heart and soul and do good deeds with a pure heart, well, the chariot takes that spark back up. So we are the road, the living highway, and the chariot is God's vehicle for carrying those sparks from above to below and from below to above. Okay. Now, it's easy to take metaphors and apply them to Kabbalah because the whole Kabbalah is built with metaphors. So I'm not taking this lightly. However, we need the metaphors to have a handle on what we're talking about. Otherwise, we'd be talking in all this Kabbalah language that you have to sit in yeshiva for 10 years to learn. That doesn't help us. Okay, but this map is for this vehicle to travel is us. Now, in the famous story of Rabbi Nachman, which is really an amazing story about our times, it's a prophetic story. It's called The Master of Prayer. And in The Master of Prayer, I'm not going to go into the whole story. It's way too complex to give over here. I did a whole series on the stories of Rabbi Nachman years ago, and I think there's some of them around still, either on my YouTube channel, whatever. But in the Master of Prayer, one of the righteous, there's two main characters, the Master of Prayer himself, who is likened to Mashiach, and there's the mighty warrior, who is the one who subdues the other side. Now, one could be called Mashiach ben Yosef, who fights the wars of God, and one could be called Mashiach ben David, who establishes the kingdom of God on earth. There are two jobs, and there's two ways to look at it. Some people say it's the same person. Some people say it's two Mashiachim. Nonetheless, over there, he says, the tzaddik says, on my hand is a map of the entire universe. On your hand, I just said that it's our whole soul. And our whole soul starts at the head and goes to the feet. That's the full span of the tree of life, of these qualities, these powers that are emanating through us from above to below. But he says it's all concentrated in the hand, because the hand, if you're familiar with reflexology, there are certain points in the body that contain points everywhere else in the body, like the foot. When you manipulate the foot, you can touch other points in the body. So to the back of the ear, I believe, is one of those points. Well, the hand also has an inclusive, interconnected network to all the rest of your body. That's how they stick a needle in here and it affects you over there. If you've ever had acupuncture. Now, we're not going to get into any debates about the effectivity of these things, because for some people they're very sensitive and it really works well, and other people, you'd have to hit them with a screwdriver for them to feel something. But the point here, though, is that inter-inclusiveness of the powers is part of what the tree of life is. It's made of 10 traits. But each of those 10 traits have all other 10 traits. So your soul expands from 10 powers to 100, because all 10 contain all 10. And that we see some of this during the Sefirot to Omer time, where we have 50 days. We're counting 49 days, actually. And we count 7 Sefirot for 7 weeks. That's 49. But again, all 7 of those contain all 7. So when we see that inter-inclusiveness of these powers, it's helping become more precise with the tree of life, and that means with ourselves. So, it's one thing. Let's say we're going to get into the details of this as we go into the material. You'll see what I'm talking about more clearly, more in explication, if you will. Okay. So the next question I'm going to ask is, how did the seven shepherds, Avram, Yitzhak, Yaakov, Moshe, Aaron, Yosef, David, how did they become the chariots of God? Because they really are. They became the powers of God's personality. Remember, his personality traits are infinite. They don't stop. There's no limit to God's personality. But what he does is he contracts them into finite forms that human beings can receive. Okay? You can't take all the electricity that's coming out of the power plant, but you just need 110 volts or 220 in Israel, wherever, whatever, to make that light shine. So it's a contraction, just like the power station puts out millions of volts. By the time it gets to your wall socket, it's been contracted down. And so too, the infinite creator has this ability to contract his infinite light into finite vessels. Okay, and those 10 traits, well, let's go back a minute in time. Imagine you're the first man or the first woman. Liat, you're the beginner. Let's go. You're the first woman. Well, the first woman, she didn't have a baby yet. There were no other babies. Now, we can go back to our pre-Adamic races, and we can talk about ancient civilization before Adam, and there are traditions like this in Kabbalah. We're not going to talk about that tonight, but understand something. When you do something for the first time, you create a vessel for everybody else after you. Okay? And because you're extending God's light into the world. So if a woman brings a baby into the world, she is creating a vessel, a power that enables other women to attach to that power to also receive the power they need to have a baby. And when someone gives charity for the first time in creation, he creates a channel of charity for other people to attach to and do charity as well. Now, I'm not going to suggest that Avraham Avinu was the first person to do charity. There was monotheism existed from the beginning. Adam was a monotheist, so was Chava. And the tradition was carried on through Enosh and Methuselah and all the ancients that are mentioned in last week's Parsha and this week. And so, but Abraham was the chariot of kindness because he said, this is such beautiful stuff. We have to teach everybody else. We can't just learn our little learning circles in the cave and just walk home and go, act like nothing's happened. No, because they had traditions, they had scrolls, they had ancient books that Abraham was the first to say, we have to teach the world. We cannot just keep living with our little monotheistic cult, and while everybody else is serving the lightning and the thunder and the sea and the river and the fertility goddess and etc. And that includes, by the way, fallen angels. So they serve them quite often. That's basically one of the secrets of Greek mythology. That the Greek mythology is built on the idea of the fallen angels taking on various human traits. Okay, so it's important to understand that the ancients all had communications. The Greeks knew the rabbis in Jerusalem. Antoninus, the great Greek general, he learned Torah in Jerusalem. And we used to send groups of rabbis to Athens to learn wisdom with the Socrates and Aristotle. So we shouldn't think that it's all just this little religious bubble that we live in. Nowadays, it seems like it. Nowadays, a lot of people like it that way. But, when you've been overwhelmed by the secular world, it's nice to cut out and, bury your head in a book in Jerusalem. I tried that for a couple of weeks. It didn't work. I realized that I have to learn. When I learn, I have to share. And hopefully that people receive that, the importance, because they say, how was Moses able to teach everybody Torah? How could he hold on to that book? Because every time he gave it away, he created a new vessel to give more. That's why it's 1:30 in the morning here, and I'm up on the mountain, and it's like daytime, you know. Maybe that's the street lights. Anyways, so but understand this principle. If when you do something, you're attaching to the power of someone who did it before you, and you're extending that power into the world so that others can do it as well. So that's one of the principles that we're going to be dealing with. So when we talk about a chariot, Avraham was the chariot of kindness because he wanted to bring the law of God into the world. And so he did the kindness of opening his house, opening the tent, giving people food and drink, washing their hands and feet, you know, as they used to say in the army, cooling your heels. And back in the desert, you know, it was probably a nice thing to see Avraham's oasis and get a break for a while. And Avraham had a lot to teach people, so it worked out well. So he became that quality. But let's ask the question, wait a minute. Abraham, that was his nature. It wasn't hard for him to do that mitzvah. That wasn't his test. What were his tests? He had a lot of tests. He had 10 tests, the Midrash says. But his test, the main test was the 10th one, of course, the Akedah, bringing his own beloved son that he had at the age of 100, bringing him on the Mizbeach, on the altar at Har Moriah, which of course is the Temple Mount today. And the rock that he brought Yitzhak on is under what's called the Kippat Hasela, the Golden Dome. That wasn't an act of kindness. That was sheer madness. People thought Avraham was mad when he said, I just got a vision. You know, he didn't tell everybody, obviously. He didn't even tell Sarah, his own wife, that he was taking Yitzhak to do the Akedah. He knew this is not something you tell people. But why? Why did he have to do this? Well, first of all, there were child murder cults throughout human history. That people got hysterical, people got crazy, and they were afraid, and they thought they appeased the gods by sacrificing their own children. Go check out the Mayan culture, the Incan culture. All over this planet, people have been doing these kind of things. I have a feeling it's still going on in some very morbid, sordid places today. But besides the point, so you see that Avraham, his test wasn't kindness. He was the chariot of kindness, but to really become a whole being, we don't become a whole being by doing what I do good all the time and nothing else. We become a whole being by doing what I'm not so good at. If I can't cook, I need to learn how to cook to help my wife. If I don't like doing dishes, well, you better learn to do that too. You know, I grew up throwing footballs and baseballs and hitting tennis balls because that's what we did. Sports, very nice. You know, would I read a book when I was 14 years old? Only when they made me. Finally, I got to college and in yeshiva, and I suddenly realized I love books. But it was a big test to sit and read, you know, a 500-page book. But the point is that Abraham, his kindness was tested in the fire of the Akedah, and that produced the Gevurah, the opposite trait of Chesed, to create a vessel to hold the light of his kindness. You see, so each test is the introverted opposite of what each tzaddik was good at. We're going to go through this list and we'll understand more. So they became channels of God, each of them, and carried God's traits into the world to the ultimate degree. And remember, these traits are not just our traits, they are God's. God created them to communicate to us. He's infinite, but he decided he's going to make a personality for himself. It's really a fascinating question. That God, he's infinite. He's the sum total of everything, Why does he need to create personality traits? Well, because he wanted to relate to us. And so he thought, well, how am I going to relate to these finite beings? I'm going to create a personality that they can relate to based on who they are. You see? So what it's really telling us that we can create ourselves. Of course, we need God's help. But if you decide you want to be wise, or you want to be understanding, or you want to be kind, or you want to be strong, or you want to be truthful, you can be those things. And you choose to be them. And you pray for God's help to become them. We are able to create ourselves. We are not victims of our realities. We're not victims of our childhoods, our parents' upbringings, etc., etc. All the things that we talk about in psychology. It's true, but it's limited. It's very limited because we have to access a higher realm, and that is the light of Hashem, which is beyond the very things that we need to fix. The light of God fixes us because it's a higher light. All right. So we spoke about Abraham and his test, and the Akedah, of course, and that idea of sacrifice to bring his son, his beloved. I mean, it's still, even every time I read it, it's still hard to imagine. Because the ultimate, I'll tell you why it's really hard, because you have to trust your own prophecy. You have to trust that the voice you're hearing is really God's and not something you created, in a dream. And who's going to believe him? Are you kidding me? Your God told you to sacrifice your own son? That sounds insane. No, but Avraham, he had that much faith in his connection to God. So you see, it's not just faith in God, it's faith in your connection. And that's where we're weak. Rabbi Nachman says the reason our prayers don't get answered is not because we don't know how to pray. It's because we don't believe in our prayers enough. What does that mean, not to believe in your prayer? Here I am, opening my mouth. That's a prayer. I ask God to accomplish the work of our hands. Right? That the pleasantness of God will be on us, and our shira will be a wonderful thing, and reach out to the world. Okay, that's a prayer. But do I really believe it's going out to the world? Well, Facebook helps, Lighthouse helps, YouTube helps, etc., etc. But no, the same faith that Abraham had when he knew that his work was a global work, and he was promised that the generations would be blessed by his own offspring, he had to believe in those promises. He had to believe in his prayers. And this is our real test, is to believe that when I talk to God, I'm talking to God. His ear is big enough to catch everybody's prayers. Now, if I'm far away and I've done the wrong things and I've got filter after filter blocking me, okay, the prayer is still useful, but it has to be like a cannon shot to break through the klipot, to break through the negative forces that surround us. Okay, so we talked about Abraham. Let's talk about Yitzhak, his son. What was his test? Yitzhak never left Eretz Israel. The rabbis call him a korban shlema, a complete offering. Korban oleh, that was completely dedicated to God. And that part of that dedication is expressed in the fact that he never left Eretz Israel. He was forbidden to. But, his main tests were dealing with the king of the region, Avimelech, who Yitzhak, remember, water back in the day, especially when you live down in the south part of this country, is a very precious thing. And they would dig wells, and they didn't have bulldozers, and they would dig wells by hand, and you can imagine at the end of the day, if they didn't find any water, it wasn't a good day. And they would dig wells, and then the Plishtim, I guess that would be called Palestinians if you were speaking English back then, they would fill up the wells. Wonderful. We got to dig them again and again and again. So part of his test, Yitzhak's test, was the perseverance in the face of the obstacles, and to overcome and not go to war. See, Yitzhak Avinu never went to war, but he subdued the kings of the region by his persistence and by his connection to Hashem. They saw that God was with him, because when they stole Rivka, his wife, the king got some serious bodily problems, and the rest of the people in the family, and women couldn't give birth, and they were screaming to the king, "What's going on?" And they said, "It must be this Jewish guy that showed up. I stole his wife." So they understood very quickly they better give back Rivka. And they blamed Yitzhak. So of course he became very wealthy from that. But you see, so God used Yitzhak to prove to the non-Jews that God's presence is with the Jews. So you see, but if he hadn't had the perseverance, it wouldn't have worked. So that's really part of the trait of Gevurah. Yitzhak Avinu was the chariot of Gevurah. This power, the power never to quit. Okay, and the power to hold your ground and to apply force when necessary. So he became the epitome of that power. Ultimately, though, you see, that power was tested when he gave a blessing to his son Esav. Now we have to understand the context. Yitzhak Avinu was in his late 130s, I believe. He was very old. He was going blind, and it was time to give his sons a blessing because he knew he was going to die, and he got fooled. According to the Peshat, he got fooled that Jacob was Esav and Esav was Jacob, and he didn't know, and his wife tricked him, and that whole story. So that test of trickery, of being deceived, is part of actually that goes with, and it is the Tikkun of Power. Because when a person's powerful, well, you think that you've got everything under control. And that's exactly when somebody clever can test you and make you fall. And what happened was that Yitzhak gave the wrong blessing to the wrong son, according to the simple interpretation. And his wife was more clever and more astute. So his power wasn't enough to fulfill the mission completely. And they paid sorely for that. His son Esav ran off and married women that served idols, which is exactly what the Jewish people were not supposed to do. He was commanded not to marry from the Canaanite daughters, and Esav still went and did it. Now, technically, he married the daughters that came from Yishmael, his uncle, who was Avraham's son. So he could say, no, these are Jewish daughters. They're Abraham's granddaughters that I married. But they were still worshiping idols, and it was a problem. Okay, but again, we have this principle that to become something, we need to be tested by it. And to become that Korban Shlema, and to end up on the Mizbech, he was only 37 years old. He lived to be 180. So, he had a long career. Now, after Yitzhak, of course, we have Yaakov. Tiferet, which stands for beauty, beautification of things, balance, harmony, and the mixing of the two powers of his father and grandfather. Now, the rabbis say that Yaakov was the Bechir Avot, the chosen of all the patriarchs, because he had the most difficult life. Right? Everybody knows his story. His son was taken from him for 21 years. He thought he was dead. He suffered. Can you imagine? You have a son that you loved, who was special, who was gifted, and then you're told that he was murdered. He was killed by an animal. And then 21 years later, he mourned him all those 21 years. The divine presence did not rest with Yaakov Avinu because of that mourning. And eventually, of course, the whole story with Yosef, and Yosef revealed his identity in Egypt, and Jacob received his divine inspiration again. The Shekhinah rested with him. But he was tested many ways. He was tested from the first night of his wedding, when he woke up in the morning married to the sister of the woman he thought he was marrying. He also was tricked. But what's the beauty? What's that balance of Tiferet that made him the chariot of God? Well, he just accepted Leah. Okay, I'll marry her sister first, then I'll marry I'll marry Rachel after. He's not going to make a war with Lavan about it. He's already married into the family. Of course, Lavan was a sorcerer. He was a trickster. He was, number 2 on the most wanted list, behind Nimrod, I believe. But still, that wasn't his only test. His daughter was raped by a non-Jew, Dinah, in Shechem. And then, of course, his own brother Esav tried to kill him, was after him to kill him after he got the blessing from Yitzhak, his father. So you see, Yaakov's tests were many, and they were inclusive of both powers, kindness and gevurah, that he had to display. So it's not enough to be strong, you have to be kind. And it's not enough to be kind, you have to be strong. And so Yaakov embodied both of those powers. And he would need them later. Because, when he came back from the land, he had to face Esav and his men. And that took gevurah. And he had to fight Esav's angel, that was gevurah. And then later he had to show kindness to Yosef and all the other, and the other, he had to give up his son Reuven and Shimon and Binyamin to get down to Egypt to appease Yosef before Yosef revealed his identity. So you see, over and over, he had to show both of these traits that the other two showed first. So it's Avram's kindness. He opened that channel up into the world. Yitzhak opened up gevurah by being able to have the persistence and resistance. But Yaakov had to have both. So he opened up a new channel called Tiferet. All right, now if we could keep going up the tree of life, after Yaakov, we come to, we're going down now, the tree of life. We come to Moshe, who's represented as Netzach, which Netzach is really an interesting word because it's used it means eternity, but at the root of the word is nitzachon, or victory. So I like to call it the eternal victory, which of course is God's victory, and the victory of the eternal, which is just a replay of the words. So Moshe Rabbeinu, of course, he had to have all these powers because he had to overcome Pharaoh, he had to overcome the heir of Rav, which, by the way, he's responsible because he brought them out. He let them come out of Egypt and join the Jewish people. And he was a humble guy. He was not a warrior per se. He had a stutter. Now, who makes a stutter the general of your army? Who makes a guy who stutters is not going to be a good politician. He's not going to be a good second prince of Egypt, etc. So he had all these tests. And yet they say, the rabbis teach, that when Moses came to the burning bush, he was actually trying to find a lost sheep. So that made him the quality to become the Messiah. Why? Because his father-in-law was Yitro. He was a super millionaire. He had all the sheep that anybody could ever want, and the goats, and the camels, and the donkeys. One sheep runs off in the desert. I'm going to leave my 5,000 to go find the one sheep? Yes, Moses does. This is a metaphor for us to understand a Jewish leader does not let one person go behind. And that's really something that the previous Rebbe in Chabad, Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak, Shner San Alav Shalom, they signed a pact in Russia before World War II. He signed a pact with his Hasidim. 10 of them, they would never leave Russia as long as there was a Jew that they could bring back to God. And they all stayed there and died. Even though the Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzhak himself, went to Poland, and then he got out of Poland, he went to France, and he finally got to America. But the point is, it's this principle that the leader never lets a person go. And what's interesting, you see even this in Hollywood movies, that the hero always has to go back and save somebody. In every adventure movie, it's like that, right? It doesn't matter from what generation the movie is, because this is a principle that holds up throughout eternity, that the leader is the one who does not mivater. In Hebrew, the word mivater means to give up on anybody. And so Moses had that quality and that power, and that's probably the reason why he allowed the heir of Rav to come out with him, because he didn't want to think these people they're going to heckle me to death and keep me from going into Eretz Israel. He figured, they're going to be good Jews, and they're going to come along and follow and believe in my prophecy. And they heckled Moshe the whole way out of Egypt for 40 years. Okay, besides all that, so Moses, these are all his tests, though, were the test of being a leader. And I think, what was I thinking of? That part of Moshe's challenge was also that he was a prince of the nation he dwelled in. And to suddenly go from the level of the stepson of the Pharaoh. The stepson of the Pharaoh means you're going to inherit the kingdom, the most powerful empire of the world. And he stepped there, he left that office, and he became a slave with the rest of the Jews. Now, of course, things happened, but essentially, he took the fall. He took the fall to be with his people. Now, if you were in line to inherit the empire, would you give up that empire to become a simple shepherd with your other people? I don't know. I don't know if I could stand it. I hope I would stand up to that test. But that's an amazing thing. To go from that level of greatness, power, wealth, glory, fame, ease, luxury, everything that all the people want in the material world, he gave it all up to go back to his people. So obviously this was a very special person. So that was Moshe's test. To be the leader, you have to give up the empire. The false empire, the empire of the other side, the empire of Pharaoh. So that again illustrates this principle of going to the complete opposite extreme of who you are to become the greatest that you can be. All right. How are we doing on time? I have no time here. Yeah, I have time. It's 1:30. It's really a blessing to be here. The air is so pure and clean. Driving in, we came in through the desert. You could smell every different neighborhood was different. Also, their fertilizer was different. It's that time of year. Okay, after Moshe, of course, and we come to Aaron. Now, Aaron, a Kohen, actually, Aaron is before, as we go down, Aaron is the priest. Aaron's test was to stand up to the people when Moses disappeared for 40 days. Aaron was Ohev Shalom, Ohev Debriot, Mekarvan la Torah. He loved people. He loved the Torah, and he loved to bring people close. That was his nature. That's the nature of a priest. That you love what you do, you love people, and you love your teaching, and you want to share it. That's easy. When you love something, it's very easy to do. But what if all of a sudden your students turn against you? What if all of a sudden they tell you, no, we don't want your God anymore, Rabbi. We want to make our own God, the golden calf. We know about that. That works better for us. So Aaron's big test was standing up to the Erev Rav and not making the golden calf. Now, and actually, destiny was against him because he didn't make the calf. What happened was that he had a parchment that was written by Yosef before he died, and he was buried with it, and they buried Yosef's body in a mummy form and hid his body in the Nile, we're told. And Moses had this parchment from Yosef, because Yosef said, you will be redeemed, pakod yifkod etchem mizeh. The verse says at the end of the Sefer Breshit, and Yosef was giving a sign to Moses when you're going to come out of Egypt. And part of that sign was that piece of parchment that was written on there, Ale Shur, the ox will rise up. And so they had a tradition. They knew where Yosef was buried underwater. I guess the underwater part of it helped preserve him. And so Moses put the parchment in the Nile River, and Yosef's body rose up. That same parchment was by Aaron as well. And the story, the Midrash teaches us that Aaron didn't know what to do. They were threatening his life. The Avraham wanted to kill him because they wanted a new God. Moses was gone. He disappeared. We've come out of Egypt. We're in the middle of the desert. Our leaders left us. What are we going to do? Real abandonment complex, you know? And so in an attempt to stall, he kept stalling them. He said, okay, bring your jewelry. Okay, bring more jewelry. And they put it all in a fire. And they, as the Midrash reads, he felt it for his life was endangered, so he threw the parchment in the fire and out came the golden calf. Now, of course, the Hollywood movies show you little guys with hammers hammering out the gold. It's a little different version. The point is, though, his test was to love people and then be betrayed. Betrayed. Now, the 3,000 people that actually contributed the gold to make that calf, not all of them were really from the seed of Abraham. However, part of the problem of the golden calf was that the other people didn't stand up to them in the first place. There were 3.2 million people. There were 3,000 Avraham. Why didn't the 3 million minus, why did they just say, you guys are not going to make this golden calf in the camp of Moses and Aaron? We believe in our God. And so there was the real problem. The whole Am was tested with the Gevurah to stand up to the Avraham, to stand up to the atheists and the people that are against the teaching of Moses and the promise of Moses. You cannot believe that your leader is going to leave you after you've been through what you've been through with him. They saw him go up on the mountain. They knew something was happening. It wasn't like he got fired and got on a cruise, Carnival Cruise Lines, took a vacation. But their faith was tested, and then they made the calf, and the people didn't stand up to them. So Aaron became, so to speak, the facilitator of that. And that was his test. Now here you see the twist. He was the facilitator of Torah, of law, of modesty. They say when Aaron died, there were 50,000 children following the coffin whose name was Aaron. See, so this custom of naming your child after the Rebbe is not a new one. And everybody loved him because he made Shalom Bayis. He was a family therapist, etc. So though you see that the quality, the very power he had of giving over what he had to give, the teachings that he had. And remember, Aaron was 3 years older than Moshe. And remember, they all had a tradition from their father Levi, who had a tradition from his father Yaakov. In other words, they all had those scrolls that came from Adam. They had the monotheistic understanding. And they had what to teach. So Aaron's test was to stand up and continue to love the people and continue being their priest and bringing atonement and bringing sacrifices. It's hard work. If you read the Midrash about what he used to do, bringing korbanot all day long for millions of people, come on. He's an 85, 890, 95, 100. He lived a long time. And he did a lot of work for the people. Now, can you imagine doing the work for the people that didn't stand up for you when your time of need? That's a test. When your employees betray you, you're going to fire them or you're going to try to bring them around? Moses and Aaron tried to bring them around, even though they betrayed him. Okay, so again, this quality is going to be brought out again in all of these Sadiqim. From Aaron, we go to Yosef. Yosef at Tzaddik, of course, everybody knows his test was being loyal, not to his own wife. He wasn't married. Yosef at Tzaddik, he wasn't cheating on his wife, God forbid. He was a single guy. He wasn't going to cheat on his boss. And he already knew, of course, that he was not going to take an Egyptian wife in any case unless she converted. Now, back in the day, conversion was a little easier than it is today. The Midrash says that a person could be converted in a day. You swear honor and belief in the God of Abraham. You go to the mikveh. You get rid of all your idols and anything connected to all of that. It was you could do the whole thing in a day in front of the judges and the rabbis. Now it takes years because there's so much to learn. But the point is that Yosef, he was loyal to his boss, and he wasn't even his chosen boss. He was sold into slavery to him. So his loyalty went way beyond what we call sexual purity and loyalty. So he became the chariot, the channel of the idea of loyalty. And, there's another midrash, you have to have the midrash, in English, Hebrew, whatever language you speak. It just fills out everything. It says over there, when Yosef resisted Potiphar's wife, it gave the power to men all over the world to be loyal to their wives. He released that energy into the world. That's a chariot, okay? That's a channel. But it was really loyalty to his boss, to another man. So for a man to cheat on his wife is a horrible thing. But to cheat on your friend or your boss? We don't need to talk about this too much. I think there's probably a few, Hollywood versions out there to talk about that. But, if you can't keep your word, then you're not a man. A man is his word. And a man who can't keep his word is really a child, or maybe less. Okay. Then we come, of course, to King David. And what is the ultimate power? King David is the king. He can put somebody to life, give somebody life or death by his word. And the classic story is the story of Shimi ben Gera, who was from the tribe of Binyamin. And Binyamin, of course, was the tribe of Shaul, the previous king who had tried to kill his own son-in-law, David. And Shaul, of course, went insane. Before that, it was jealousy, and an evil spirit inhabited him and was trying to kill David all the time. And then after David had a father-in-law that wanted to kill him, he had a son that wanted to kill him, Avshalom, and take his kingdom. And so one day he got the word that Avshalom had announced that he was making himself king in Hebron. And David understand that I cannot stay here and let my son come fight a war with me. It is the most horrendous thing in the world. Can you imagine if the son of Lahavdil, if the son of the king or the president comes out in open rebellion to his father? It just destroys the fabric of the country. It destroys the faithful people's faith in the leadership, which is already happening, unfortunately. But nonetheless, so what did David do? He took his family and they fled Jerusalem in the middle of the night. And, from Jerusalem down to Jericho is not a short walk. But they went by foot all the way down towards the Jordan. And on the way, they're going through the land of Binyamin. Binyamin, the land of Shaul. And this fellow Shimi ben Gera was not a simple guy. He wasn't a poor guy. He was a wealthy, powerful guy in the tribe. And he came out throwing rocks and cursing David. And David's men said, Amelech, Adoni Amelech, you could kill him. Put him to death. When you throw a rock at the king, you're high of the death penalty, right? And you curse the king. You don't go to jail. You go to the gallows. And what King David said? The rabbi said, this is when King David became the chariot of kingship. When he said, it's not him talking, it's God making him talk. Now, what is David blaming God and putting curses in Shimi's mouth? No. He understands that Shimi already hated him. Shimi made himself into a vessel, a chariot for evil, for cursing. And so he chose the path of evil. And so God used him in the path that he chose. So we have to be careful about our choices because we can become a conduit for the thing that we choose, even though if tomorrow morning we wake up and we don't want to be the conduit for that anymore. So King David said, no, leave him alone. And the rabbis say at that very moment, he became the fourth leg on the throne of glory, along with Avraham, Yitzhak, and Yaakov. Why? Because he had the power of king to kill Shimi, and he didn't use it. He had the power to wipe out all of his enemies, and he didn't use it. And so you see, that's the true king, who doesn't use the power given to him by God in the Torah in order to show kindness. And of course, King David, he was tested by this same measure, because he saw Bathsheba, a married woman, bathing on the roof of her house in Jerusalem, and he said, the rabbis say he had Ruach HaKodesh. He understood that she would be the mother of Shlomo HaMelech. Well, that's very convenient to have Ruach HaKodesh, to know that this woman who's already married and bathing on the roof is going to be my wife. He couldn't wait for that to play itself out. See, it's not enough to have Ruach HaKodesh, friends. You have to have the patience to let it happen. You cannot force things. And so David, even though he had the power of life and death, and he had the right to take, he could have done other things. He could have gone to Uriah, or Uriah as he's called, and said, listen, I have a vision that I'm supposed to marry your wife. What do you want to do about this? And they could have worked out a deal. Give her a get, and I'll give you $1 million and finished. Because that's how women were treated like that back then. They were considered property. Unfortunately, that's the level that humanity was at the time. But the Torah laws protected women. Nonetheless, King David couldn't wait. And so that same power that he showed by not putting Uriah to death, he lost that power of restraint. I want to call that restraint. The king has to have the most restraint because he has the most power. And he didn't pass that test there. Now the rabbis say anybody who says that King David sinned, Eno Elo, he's making a mistake. And there's a great amount of discussion about what that means. That King David really didn't make the mistake, that Uriah was already chayav mita because he disobeyed the king's order in a previous situation. And so that he was not actually going outside the law. But nonetheless, we see that the shot of Sefer Shmuel tells us that God was not happy with King David, even if you could find a loophole in the law. You can find a lot of loopholes in the law, but it doesn't make God happy that you do. So regardless, we've gone through the 7 shepherds. Now, above those 7, which represent the 7 lower Sefirot of the tree of life, which are our right arm, our left arm, our torso, the right and left thigh, the sexual organ. Okay, well, we have 3 other powers in the head, Chokhmah, Bina, and Dat, and these are represented. Chokhmah, of course, is King Solomon. He was called the wisest of all men, and King Solomon had 1,000 wives, and there was a law that kings are not allowed to take too many wives, but the rabbis say that he didn't consummate those relationships. They were all political unions in order to make peace with the world. Back in the day, how did you make peace with a neighboring king? You married his daughter, and then you got along because, it's family already. So King Solomon was a master of that. He used his wisdom that was given to him by Hashem to create world peace. He was the Messiah of his generation. But his test, what was his test? Well, he got involved in the occult. And that's an interesting thing because the occult, basically, when people turn to the occult, they want power. And people to this day are using the occult to try to get power. It's used to try to achieve success in business, in Hollywood, all kinds of places. You could find out things about that. But if you're king, you don't need to find power outside the Torah. So you see, even though he had this wisdom, his test of wisdom was using it in the right time, in the right place. And he ended up, here again, another midrash. We're told that the king of the demons actually replaced Solomon in his own body and threw Solomon out into another body into the Far East. Now it's an outrageous midrash to think about it, But the idea of a demon replacing a soul is not outrageous when you study the books of reincarnation, because this is part of why people have to have exorcisms. And if you look at in the last couple of years, there's been like 50,000, I heard, requests for exorcism in northern Italy, because in northern Italy, which of course Catholicism rules, they have a big problem with well, let's say serving other gods, because that's what JC is. Okay, I don't want to go there too far. Well, I went there, didn't I? Nonetheless, the point is, even the wisest of man is tested where? At his very strength, at his wisdom. And the Arizal Kadosh tells us that Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai reached the pinnacle of understanding, of Bina, and that he was the chariot of Dot, knowledge. And so that leaves Ketter, the crown. And there are those that say, of course, in the Hasidic world, that Rabbi Nachman reached the level of the Ketter of God, which is complete humility, where you completely erase yourself for God. So there's nothing left of you. You just are a pure channel of whatever God wants at any moment of any day, in any place, in any situation. That ultimate level is who that is and who it was is a debate, but okay. I think we've gone through it pretty well, and we've used a lot of time up, but I'm not going to quit in the middle of the river here. We got work to do. But with all that said, and you know, I hope some of you were taking notes. Ideally, I would have had a perfectly drawn up graphic with all the information that I just gave over, given to each of you on a paper. Someday, perhaps we'll put it together into a seminar that can be, given out to people. But I just, wasn't able to write it all up. This is all my longhand notes. But really, the information I just gave you is years of culling information. Still, I'm going to ask some questions that are going to help us bring these ideas home and make them personal. Okay? And these questions are really what I call the Kabbalah personality profile that we've been trying to get to. So what I would say is, at least, I don't know if you took notes or not yet, but have a piece of paper and a pencil ready. Or you can use a pen, no problem. I remember teachers that would be sticklers about that. A number 2 pencil, right? A blue ink pen, not black. Ay. Memories of college. Okay, but have that ready, because I'm going to ask questions and I want you to write down your answers. And maybe with the Lighthouse's help, we'll produce a DOF that will be distributed for continuing this work. Okay. So I see Ariel is not at his camera. There he is. Hey, Ariel. How you doing? You're not on the street. I can't hear you. Your microphone's turned off. Here comes Liat. Okay, hi. Everybody have something to write with. I'm going to ask questions, and you'll hear what we've been learning through the questions. And what we want to do is, first, there's something secret. I learned this in college by taking a speed reading course, believe it or not, about meditating before taking a test. Because what we want to do is access our higher self, our higher soul, before we take a test. This is to help us answer the questions better. And in this case, better means more precise and more truthful and more profoundly who we are. It's not just getting the questions right on an SAT or a GMAT, etc. Okay, so we're going to do a little, just get relaxed, like we do. Get comfortable. Breathe deep. I wish you all could have a jar of this air here in Meron. We'll be broadcasting live on Facebook another class from Meron tomorrow, Erev Shabbat Talks. Breathe deep through your nose. Let your body relax. Just enjoy the freedom of breathing. Enjoy being yourself. Exhale all the tension of the day. Exhale any negativity, resentment, small-mindedness, judgment. Just let it all go. It's not so hard. It's just a moment of understanding. I don't need these negative feelings. They're not helping anybody. Whatever happened today, it's gone. What we have is now. Now, as we breathe, we're emptying our mind. Each breath of life takes in new clarity, new openness. And each exhalation releases all the things we don't need anyways. If people have hurt you, let it go. It doesn't change them. We have to let it go. Otherwise, they're still in our lives. Now, as I ask the questions, they're clearly designed from the tree of life and the qualities we learned about. If you don't remember the names, it's not important. What's important is your apprehension of your truth. Okay. So when we answer a question, we don't look for the answer. You let the answer arise within you. This is what a Kabbalah means, to receive your answer. I don't have to scan my memory to find the answer to these questions. I just simply need to be open to my higher holy self, and it will provide the answers of your truth. Okay, so the first question. Of the 10 qualities, the 7 main emotional qualities, and the 3 intellectual qualities, wisdom, understanding, and humility, kindness, strength, beauty, victory, splendor, loyalty, kingship. Of these 10 qualities, which is most important to you? Just write it down. Next question. Don't think about it too long. Just let it come. Don't play ping pong in your mind. Let it arise. Which of the qualities that we mentioned comes most naturally to you? Is it easy for you to be kind or to be strong? To be graceful or to be competitive? To be understanding or of sharp judgment? Which quality were you given as a gift? Next question. Which quality is most difficult for you? Which quality would test you the most? It shouldn't be too hard. We know where we get tested. Next question. Which biblical character do you identify with most? Now, we covered a series of biblical characters. Maybe that's not the one for you. I thought of, that maybe perhaps many women would not identify with these male characters and they would identify more with certain female characters like Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, Leah. And there are many. I made a list. Bruria, the wise woman. And of course, Yehudit, Devorah Hanaviyah, Hannah Hanaviyah, Bathsheba, the queen and mother of the new king. So this question is open-ended to any character from the Bible that you identify with most. Now, part of this question is why? What is the quality of that person that you most identify with? Maybe you like King David because he was a musician and a poet. Okay, that's fine. But you're not admiring King David for being a warrior or a politician, a statesman. What you're honoring in your heart is his musical ability or his poetic ability. It's fine, but let's be precise. So, along with this question, what test did your most favorite character have to pass? What test are they most famous for passing or not partially passing? Okay. The next question is perhaps one of the most important. What is the chief test in your own life? What is the main test that you've had to stand up to perhaps many times over the years? And the 10th question, and before you answer it, allow it to come. Don't jump. What reward would you like to receive for passing your test? Be honest. Be straight. What reward would you like to receive for passing the main test of your life? Okay. Now, the next series of questions, they're not very many, related, and it's related to the qualities that we've been talking about tonight, but we'll have to explain more later, I think. I mean, the police are roaming around. I have my mask ready, but you know, here on the mountain we have protection. Okay. These are interesting questions. Just be honest and straight. We go through them quickly because we won't have time to talk. Of the 4 answers I'm going to read to you, which do you love most? The mountains, the sea, the forest, or the desert? Which type of geography do you love the most? Mountain, sea, forest, desert. Next question. What of the next 4 items do you hate the most? The lust for money, the lust for sex, the lust for power, or the lust for fame? Those 4 items are known to produce a lot of lust in people. Which of those 4 do you hate the most? Okay. Next question. What do you admire the most? A kind person? A powerful person? A loyal person? Or a beautiful, graceful person? Talk about beautiful and graceful, we don't just mean physical beauty, but how they carry themselves. That's what grace is. It's how your emanation of your deeper self. Loyalty, beauty and grace, power, or kindness. Now the next question, I'm going to read to you a list of the possible answers. Depending on your own subtle expression, you might change one of the answers, but that's okay because they're general. What is your favorite color? Silver, white, red, green, black, dark pink, purple, yellow, or blue? I'll read them again. Silver, white, red, green, black, dark pink, purple, yellow, blue. If you don't have a favorite color, well, it's time to choose. If you like all colors, well, you should be a painter. What can I tell you? Next question. Would you describe yourself as being strongest? Your strongest point is your intellectual ability, emotional ability, or physical ability? And keep it at that general level. Heart, mind, body. Where are you strongest? Okay. So that's our test. Test is probably not a good word here. They call it there's this fancy word for it in psychology. I forgot it now. It's okay. A battery, yes. That doesn't sound much better, right? Okay. But we asked a lot of questions right now. All of these questions, if you're paying attention, you'll see, and maybe you're not familiar with all of them have to do with the same traits we just learned about. Color, your favorite landscape, your favorite traits, the tests, all of these questions we just asked, that I asked you to answer, relate to the 10 traits we just talked about. Now, your job, now, if we were sitting in my office, it would be my job to help you, but your job is to find the unifying threads, the unifying themes that run through your answers. Because this is going to help us really find out who we are according to the filter of Kabbalah. So this is not something that I would expect anybody to answer off the top of their head. It's something that I would assume you would want to sit down, a cup of tea, a little classical music, relax, review the questions. You can open up Rabbi Kaplan's book on Kabbalah and find all these traits. You can open online. I'm sure there's probably 50 websites that have the Kabbalah Tree of Life that you can have in front of you. But to find, the job is to find the unifying threads between all the answers of your questions. And perhaps, I'm not sure about next week because we'll see where this goes, but we'll be able to perhaps maybe not, well, now we'll have a time for some questions. I see we've got something coming in here. Okay. Can you, I see Liat, you wrote, can you repeat it? Where are the lists? Yeah, this is, this was the problem of, I guess I just wasn't, in touch with the office. I just didn't have the time this week to type all this material up because I wrote the test up this week. I put the whole thing together this week, actually. And it needs to be refined, I think. And, professionalism is something we strive for. But if you have any specifics, I could read them for you again. Thank you, Cindy. I appreciate your appreciation. Can we answer them now? Yes, that's right. I missed some. Okay. Well, I'll tell you what I could do to make myself more available is I'm at Rabbi Avraham Shira at gmail.com. If you have questions or want me to review something, write it out in a format, on an email, and then I'll get to answer you in a better way. I mean, I could answer now if you can be more specific, but I don't know which one you missed, Liat. So it's hard for me to help you in this sense. Okay, Rhonda writes to everyone, money, sex, fame, and power. Okay, that's one of the questions. Power, that's right. Remember we had 10 colors. Actually, I believe there were, 10. Right? Black, yellow, purple, dark pink, blue, yellow, purple, dark pink, black, green, red, white, and silver. Where are you strongest, intellectually, emotionally, or physically? Now you might say, well, I'm kind of strong here and I'm kind of strong. No, but you got to pick one. Your native ability, your native strength, not something that you worked on. And then, of course, the 4 landscapes: desert, earth, desert, forest, sea, and mountain. The person you most admire, a kind person, a powerful person, a beautiful, graceful person, or a loyal person. These questions can be expanded, which might be some of my work in the future, we'll see. And then I asked basically, which quality is most important to you? What quality comes naturally to you? Which is the most difficult for you? Which is least important or easy for you? What biblical character do you identify with? What quality do you see in that biblical character? What test did they pass? And what test do you have to pass in your life? And what test, also, I'm not sure if I mentioned this the first go through, what test would you least want to go through? Least want. And the final question, what reward would you like? I didn't say, do you think you deserve? Would you like, what reward? If God is handing out rewards. Okay. I think those are all of them. Yeah, wasn't so hard, was it? Okay. So this is a profile. It means it's meant to be studied, to be analyzed, to be thought about, to be meditated on. There are no right or wrong answers. It's to help us achieve greater understanding of ourselves in the context of God's Torah, of the Pnimiut Torah. And I think it will be interesting to hear more from all of you. Let's see. I see that Mike wrote them out. Oh, that's great. I knew that was going to be a problem when I put it together. Without a DOF in front of you, it's going to be more difficult. But still, I think it was useful. I'd like to hear some of your comments. Please write me. And believe it or not, I'm going to walk over to the Ketter of Rabbi Shimon Bar Yochai and try to say a few more prayers. The world needs prayers right now, obviously. I think we're in World War III. We'll see how it goes. But we're going to win no matter what. God has to win. It's not us winning, it's God winning. You have to understand that. Whatever war it is that we're in, the war of truth, the war of loyalty, or maybe it's the war of the traits that we've been talking about tonight. So God should bless you all with a great Shabbat and a wonderful time to meditate. Of course, Shabbat in the middle of the night, I find at 2, 3 in the morning is amazing. The whole world is quiet. That means the psychic atmosphere is much clearer at night. Now, of course, that depends on what city you live in, I imagine, but really, it's a wonderful time to get up early if you can, and use it for deep contemplation. And we should all be blessed with that special time, because we can't achieve a special relationship with God unless we set aside a special time to do so. Okay, we'll look for you guys all next week. And wonderful, Rhonda. I'm glad you had some other ideas. You can also write those down, send them off. And perhaps next week I'm not sure where we're going to take this next week. Maybe we'll do something completely different. Next week is Parshas Lech Lecha, which is an important parsha for people all over the world, because we're all going to ourselves. Shabbat Shalom.